Most people don't realize this, but low libido doesn't always start in the body. Sometimes it starts in the brain, long before a man notices anything physically wrong. You feel more tired, less motivated, less interested, less driven, and eventually you assume it's just stress, age, or low testosterone. But what if the real problem is something much deeper? What if your brain's reward system is no longer responding the way it used to, and there's now a peptide getting attention because of that exact reason? Now here's where things get interesting. Because the men talking about this peptide aren't describing it the way you'd expect. They're not just saying better performance. They're describing something stranger, more mental, more neurological, increased desire, more anticipation, more interest, almost like a switch inside the brain suddenly becoming more responsive again. And honestly, that changes the entire conversation around peptides, male performance, and human optimization. But before you get excited, there's something you need to understand first. Because once you start influencing the same pathways connected to motivation, reward, dopamine, and desire, you're no longer talking about a simple male enhancement discussion anymore. You're talking about brain chemistry. And the truth about that world is very different from what most people online are telling you. Most people think low libido automatically means low testosterone. And honestly, that's one of the biggest misconceptions in modern male health. Because what a lot of men are experiencing right now isn't just hormonal decline, it's biological overload. Poor sleep, chronic stress, constant stimulation, obesity, inflammation, dopamine exhaustion, all of these things quietly affect male performance long before someone notices it. And the scary part is, most guys don't even realize it's happening until motivation, energy, and confidence start fading at the same time. Now think about your own routine for a second. You wake up tired, rely on caffeine to function, spend half the day overstimulated by screens, barely recover properly, and somehow expect your body to operate like it's in peak condition. That's like running a high-performance car on bad fuel and being shocked when the engine struggles. And this is exactly why conversations around peptides, peptide therapy, and metabolic health are exploding right now. Because men are starting to realize the issue may not be masculinity itself, but the signaling systems behind it. Low libido isn't always a testosterone problem. Sometimes it's a signaling problem, and that changes everything. Because libido isn't just about hormones floating around in your bloodstream. It's about communication between the brain, nervous system, metabolism, inflammation levels, and reward pathways. Your body is constantly asking one question: do we have enough energy and safety to prioritize desire right now? And if your biology interprets stress, poor recovery, or metabolic dysfunction as danger, guess what gets pushed to the background first? But here's where things get even more interesting. Men are now searching for solutions that feel more natural, smarter, and more connected to human optimization instead of brute force hormonal manipulation. That's why biohacking culture exploded around recovery, longevity, anti-aging, and regenerative medicine in the first place. People don't just want performance anymore, they want their brain and body working together again. And once you understand that, the next question becomes unavoidable. What if libido starts in the brain long before it shows up in the body? Here's a psychology fact most men aren't ready for. Desire is neurological before it's hormonal. That sounds strange at first, because most people grew up hearing the same explanation over and over again. Testosterone equals libido. But the brain doesn't work that simply. Libido starts as a motivational signal before it becomes a physical response. In other words, your brain has to decide something feels rewarding, exciting, and worth pursuing before your body fully follows along. And that's where peptide science starts getting very interesting. Think about what happens when someone is chronically stressed, overstimulated, sleep-deprived, or emotionally burned out. The body adapts by conserving energy. Dopamine pathways change, motivation drops, reward sensitivity decreases, and suddenly things that once felt exciting start feeling flat. This is why some men describe low libido as more than just a physical issue. They say things like, "I just don't feel drive anymore." And that word drive matters, because your brain uses similar circuits for motivation, ambition, reward, attraction, and desire. They're deeply connected systems, not isolated switches. Now here's where peptide therapy enters the conversation in a very different way. Some peptides being explored today don't primarily act through blood flow or direct hormonal replacement. Instead, they interact with neural pathways tied to dopamine, arousal, and reward signaling. That's a completely different category of approach inside biohacking and human optimization. Instead of forcing the body from the outside, the idea becomes, can we influence the communication systems that regulate desire in the first place? And honestly, that question alone changes how you think about male performance forever. But here's the part nobody talks about enough. Modern life may be training the male brain to suppress desire without men realizing it. Constant stimulation, doom scrolling, stress hormones, poor metabolic health, low recovery, even endless novelty consumption, all of it affects how the brain processes reward. Your mind starts craving fast dopamine while losing sensitivity to deeper forms of motivation and connection. And once you understand that mechanism, something clicks. Maybe libido problems today aren't just hormonal failures, maybe they're neurological adaptations, which leads directly into the peptide that started getting everyone's attention in the first place. Now here's where things start getting really interesting, because this is the peptide that made a lot of people stop and say, wait, this works differently. The compound most commonly mentioned in these conversations is PT-141, also known as bremelanotide. And unlike traditional male performance drugs that focus mainly on blood flow, this one started attracting attention because of where it acts, the brain, not just the body. And that subtle difference completely changes the conversation around peptides, performance, and libido. Most people hear male enhancement and immediately think about vascular effects, circulation, nitric oxide, blood vessels, basically plumbing. But PT-141 entered the world of peptide therapy through a different door. Researchers began exploring how it interacts with melanocortin receptors linked to arousal, motivation, and reward pathways. Which means the mechanism isn't simply forcing a physical response. It may influence the neurological side of desire itself. And honestly, that's probably why this topic exploded so fast in biohacking and human optimization circles. And here's the part that surprises almost everyone. This peptide actually gained approval for women first. That alone should tell you how different this category is. Because historically, most male performance discussions focused heavily on mechanics and hormones, while female libido research explored desire and brain signaling more deeply. But eventually, men started experimenting with the same idea and saying something unexpected. This doesn't feel like traditional performance enhancement. Some described it more like a mental shift, almost like the brain becoming more responsive to attraction and motivation again. This peptide doesn't just affect blood flow, it affects desire itself. And whether that sounds exciting or slightly unsettling probably depends on how you look at modern peptide science. Because once you move from the vascular system into the reward system, you're no longer talking only about physical performance. You're talking about motivation, anticipation, emotional reward, and how the brain decides what feels desirable in the first place. And that's exactly why some men say the experience feels fundamentally different from anything they've tried before. Most people assume libido and erection are the exact same thing, but they're not. And honestly, understanding that difference changes the entire conversation around male performance. Because physical response and actual desire don't always move together. A man can have normal hormone levels and still feel mentally disconnected from attraction, motivation, or excitement. And this is where some men started describing certain peptides in a very unusual way. Not as something that simply improves performance, but as something that changes how desire feels internally. A lot of users describe what they call a mental switch. Not in a dramatic Hollywood way, more subtle than that. They talk about increased interest, spontaneous attraction, stronger anticipation, even feeling more mentally engaged with intimacy again. And from a peptide science perspective, that's fascinating, because the experience they're describing sounds less like a vascular effect and more like activation of reward pathways connected to dopamine and motivation. In other words, the brain may be becoming more responsive before the body fully reacts. Now here's where it gets even deeper. Modern men are often living in a state of overstimulation and under-recovery at the same time. Constant dopamine spikes from social media, stress, poor sleep, low metabolic health, high inflammation, all of that gradually flattens reward sensitivity. Your brain adapts to intensity by becoming less responsive to normal signals. And over time, that can affect motivation, confidence, focus, recovery, and yes, libido too. Which means some men aren't actually lacking masculinity. They may be lacking neurological responsiveness. The real effect may not be physical first, but psychological. And that's exactly why this conversation matters so much inside biohacking, longevity, and human optimization communities right now. Because once you realize libido may reflect the state of your nervous system, your recovery, and your reward circuitry, it stops being just a bedroom issue. It becomes a biological feedback signal about how your brain and body are functioning overall. And naturally, once something starts influencing the brain this directly, one uncomfortable question immediately follows. But here's where things get uncomfortable. Because the moment a compound starts affecting the brain, the conversation changes completely. It's no longer just about performance, it's about neurochemistry. And that's exactly why this topic deserves more respect than most people give it online. In biohacking culture, it's easy to get pulled into the excitement of peptide benefits without fully thinking through the consequences. Faster results, stronger desire, more motivation. Sounds amazing, until people forget that the same systems linked to pleasure are also linked to unpredictability. Now let's talk about what's actually being reported. Some users describe nausea, flushing, headaches, elevated blood pressure, and strong physical sensations shortly after use. Others report completely inconsistent responses, intense effects one time, almost nothing the next. And honestly, that variability itself tells you something important. We're dealing with systems connected to the brain, reward pathways, stress response, and metabolic signaling. This isn't like taking a basic supplement for recovery or inflammation. The deeper the interaction with the nervous system, the more individual biology starts to matter. But here's the part nobody really wants to admit. Some men become obsessed with chasing the feeling itself. Not necessarily intimacy, the anticipation, the novelty, the mental stimulation. And once that starts happening, you're entering dangerous territory psychologically. Because your brain is incredibly good at associating reward with external triggers. That's why everything from social media to gambling to certain substances can become compulsive over time. And while peptide therapy is very different from recreational drugs, anything that influences dopamine and motivation deserves caution and self-awareness. The more a compound affects the brain, the more carefully it should be respected. And this doesn't mean these peptides are bad. It means the conversation has to mature beyond hype. Real longevity, anti-aging, regenerative medicine, and human optimization aren't about chasing endless stimulation. They're about building systems that improve your biology sustainably. And once you start seeing libido as part of a broader neurological and metabolic picture, the next question becomes much bigger than male performance alone. Now here's the question that's quietly starting to reshape this entire field. What if the future of male performance has less to do with hormones and more to do with brain signaling? Because for decades, most approaches focused heavily on the physical side, blood flow, testosterone, vascular response. But modern peptide science is pushing the conversation somewhere very different. Toward motivation, reward circuitry, neurological responsiveness. And honestly, that shift may end up being far more important than most people realize right now. Think about how modern life affects men biologically. Chronic stress, poor sleep, overstimulation, metabolic dysfunction, low recovery, constant dopamine spikes. All of it impacts how the brain processes motivation and desire. And that's why libido may actually function like a biomarker, not just for sexual health, but for overall metabolic health, inflammation levels, nervous system balance, and even emotional state. In other words, low drive may sometimes be less about masculinity and more about biological exhaustion hiding underneath the surface. And this next part explains why the peptide conversation is becoming so much bigger than intimacy alone. Researchers in biohacking communities are increasingly exploring whether future peptide protocols could influence broader areas of human optimization, things like motivation, focus, reward sensitivity, stress adaptation, and behavioral performance. That doesn't mean we suddenly discovered a motivation injection. Human biology is never that simple. But it does mean the line between neurological performance and physical performance is becoming harder to separate. The future of male performance may be less about hormones and more about brain signaling. And once you truly understand that, something changes in how you see your own body. You stop asking, how do I force performance, and start asking, what is my biology trying to tell me? Because maybe the real goal isn't just stronger desire. Maybe it's becoming the kind of person whose brain, body, recovery, energy, and motivation are finally working together again. Now here's the real question. After hearing all of this, how differently are you going to look at libido from now on? Because once you understand that desire may be connected to dopamine, recovery, metabolic health, inflammation, sleep, stress, and brain signaling, you can't reduce the conversation to just testosterone anymore. The body is more interconnected than most people realize. And honestly, that's exactly why peptide science is getting so much attention right now. But let's be honest for a second. Are you actually trying to improve your biology, or are you just chasing stimulation? Because there's a huge difference between the two. The people who truly improve performance, longevity, anti-aging, and human optimization long-term usually aren't the ones searching for the fastest shortcut. They're the ones learning how their nervous system, metabolism, recovery, and motivation actually work together. And that mindset shift alone changes everything. If this video opened your mind even a little, don't stop here, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay close, because this is exactly what we break down on this channel. Peptides, peptide therapy, metabolic health, recovery, performance, and what these compounds really do to your body, through science, not hype. And I want to ask you something. Do you think modern men are actually dealing with a hormone problem or a brain and lifestyle problem disguised as one? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to see what you think. And if you want to understand where this entire peptide revolution is heading next, you need to watch the previous video, The Next Ozempic, The Truth About This New Peptide. Because it's not enough to understand peptides connected to libido and performance, you also need to understand how peptides are starting to reshape fat loss, metabolism, appetite, and energy regulation itself. And once you connect those two worlds together, the future of human optimization starts looking very different.